Okay, so welcome to 6.4, which is solving general trigonometric equations. Solving general trigonometric equations. Okay, so let's consider a couple things. So, x and y coordinate axes, or theta versus f of theta. Let's do x and y. And let's have half of, pardon me, a circle of radius 4. Let's see if I can draw a circle of radius 4. Yeah, okay, perfect. So I will copy and paste this. Copy, paste. Okay, so over here, do you agree that at 5 pi over 6 and pi over 6, that the y coordinate is 1/2? Say, actually, yeah, should I do 1/2? I just wanted to do a general. I guess 1/2 is a good example, though. Okay. So this would be pi over 6. And this would be 5 pi over 6. So do you agree that sine of pi over 6 is going to be the same as sine of 5 pi over 6? But how can I rewrite 5 pi over 6 in terms of pi over 6? Well, I claim that it's going to be pi minus pi over 6. Agreed? So sine of pi over 6 is the same as sine of pi minus pi over 6. And I'll come back to that in a moment. Okay, so now, let me actually... I'm going to continue this circle, actually. So let's do the same analysis for cosine. So let's say I want cosine to be 1/2 now. So for cosine to be 1/2, I would have to be at an angle of pi over 3. Or going forward, this is not negative pi over 3, but it's going to be positive 5 pi over 3. Okay, so what I'm saying here, in terms of now 2 pi, is that cosine of pi over 3, 60 degrees, in this example, is going to be the same as cosine of 5 pi over 3. But how can I rewrite 5 pi over 3 in terms of pi over 3? Well, I claim that it's going to be 2 pi pi minus pi over 3. So I have that cosine of pi over 3 is the same as cosine of 2 pi minus pi over 3. Okay, so let's note. What can I conclude here for any angle? So note. So for all theta in R, we have that sine of theta is the same as sine of pi minus theta. Pi minus theta. And we have cosine of theta will be the same as cosine of 2 pi minus theta. In fact, let me write pi in yellow. I think yellow would be a better color for it, just like I did here. So this is the same as cosine of 2 pi minus theta. Okay, do you agree that that's true? Because we have our theta here and the reference angle theta here, which is as measured from pi for sine. And then we have theta here and the reference angle theta here, which is 2 pi with respect to 2 pi for cosine. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. Go ahead and move this down 1 line. Okay, so anyways, given that, let's go ahead and solve some general trigonometric equations. So for example, let's solve the following on the interval. So solve the following. On the interval from 0 inclusive and 2 pi non-inclusive. So for number 1, we have 2 times sine of 2 theta minus 2 root 3 times sine of theta minus 2 cosine theta plus root 3 is equal to 0. Okay, so let me rewrite this first, and then I will use my double angle formula for sine. So sine of 2 theta, I'll get to my double angle in a moment. So minus 2 root 3 sine theta minus 2 cosine theta plus root 3 is equal to 0. So let's rewrite sine of 2 theta as 2 sine theta cosine theta, because that's a double angle formula for cosine. And then I'm going to swap the order. I'm going to then do minus 2 cosine theta. Then I'll do minus 2 root 3 sine theta. And then plus root 3 is equal to 0. And the reason I did that is because I can now factor by grouping. I notice from the first 2 terms, what I have common is a 2 and a cosine theta. And when I factor that out from these 2, I'll have a 2 sine theta minus 1 remaining. And from the second 2 terms, it looks like I have negative root 3, and that's all that's common to both. And when I factor out a negative root 3, I'll have a positive 2 times sine theta and a negative 1 remaining. Okay, so these both have a 2 sine theta minus 1 factor attached to them, which when I factor out gives me 2 cosine theta minus root 3, which I then set to 0. And now I can solve. So if the first factor is 0, namely 2 sine theta minus 1 equal to 0 is equivalent to sine theta equal to 1 is equivalent to sine theta equal to 1/2. So sine theta being equal to 1/2. Okay, at what angles theta between 0 and 2 pi is sine 1/2? Well, that would be at pi over 6 and 5 pi over 6. But notice that's pi over 6 and pi minus pi over 6. So I can actually note that this is the same as pi minus pi over 6 if I wanted to be really thorough. Okay, so now let's look at the second parenthetical or factor. So I have that 2 cosine theta minus root 3 equals to 0. Gives me 2 cosine theta equal to root 3. Dividing both sides by 2 gives me cosine theta. Let's do theta in hot pink. Is root 3 over 2. Okay. Well, what's interesting is that gives me some overlap because that would be theta is pi over 6 and 11 pi over 6. Now I've already got pi over 6 from the first solution, but notice that 11 pi over 6 can be thought of as 2 pi minus pi over 6. Okay, so all my solutions for this problem will be pi over 6. I only need to indicate it once. And then 5 pi over 6. And then 11 pi over 6. And those are all possible solutions between 0 and 2 pi for that. Okay, so let's go on. Number 2.